G'day guys, it's Bruce here again. Well, I've finally decided that it's about time that we did something with the CBR250RR again. It's been a little while. I've sort of had it sitting here and been sort of stuck doing other tasks. So, and I noticed recently when I sort of was rolling the bike in and out of the garage that I was having a bit of a problem with the brakes sort of sticking as I was trying to roll the bike in and out of the garage, and the rolling sort of ability of this bike hasn't been too good, so I've sort of been thinking about wheel bearings and stuff like that, but I think it probably is actually just the front brakes that are probably the main problem. So we're going to get onto that. We're going to get that sorted. I've also got some new lines here, braided front and rear lines. I want to take the calipers off obviously, and I'll have a look at why they're sticking. I'm hoping that I don't need new caliper seals, but you know, we may encounter that as well, of course. Yeah, so front and rear held brake lines, new pads. I'm going to rebuild the master cylinder. The master cylinder is probably okay actually. The braking feels okay when it's actually going, when it was working. But still, it's probably good to rebuild it because I've got the kit. I might as well do that. And normally I would rebuild the calipers at the same time because we'd strip those down. So the plan is to actually strip them down, have a look, see what sort of state the pots and things are in. They might have a little bit of rust around the outsides of them or something like that. And the other thing I want to do with this bike is get the forks off. So we want to get the forks off and we want to start rebuilding the front forks, get some new oil in them, new seals in them, because it's all looking pretty old. The dust caps on top are pretty cracked up. So I think it's time to get stuck into this bike, get something done to it. I've got a new fork driver kit for the seals, so we're going to have a go at using that as well and see what that works like. It should make life a little bit easier rather than my old method of using the old seals to sort of tap the thing down. So I'll get into it now. I'm going to start stripping the front of this bike off. We'll get the brakes off first, and then we'll get the front wheel off, and we'll go from there. One of the things that's really nice to have actually is one of these front lift stands as well, because this actually lifts from underneath the headstock here, and it goes on underneath the triple tree up there. It's probably a little bit hard to see, but basically it connects in under there, and it means that your forks are free. They're not tied up by the stand because you're not lifting from the bottom of the wheel or from, you know, the axles, which is way better. So this is definitely worth having. I'd suggest you invest in one of these if you haven't already got one, especially if you want to be doing jobs like this. It's just one of the easiest things to, you know, one of the easiest ways to do this front end work on the bike. As for the parts we've got, this is the seal driver here, fork seal driver. And this is supposed to be good from 39 to 50 millimeter forks. It's quite a pricey part, but it should make the thing a whole bunch easier. These just split apart and you put them over, and you can kind of hammer down onto this. We've got EBC double sintered pads for the front. When I first ordered these, and don't make this mistake, I ordered a set, and I thought that a set was two, but a set was just one, so I had to order a second set, of course. So a set is just a pair. But not left and right pair, just one pair that goes in one caliper. I shouldn't have made that mistake. I don't know why I made that mistake, but I did. This is the front cylinder, front master cylinder rebuild kit in here. Pretty easy to fit. Rear lines, front lines, seals, fork seals, and dust seals. So we'll get those out shortly. So what I was doing here is I was trying to take off the calipers and the master cylinder all in one hit. And the reason I wanted to do that is simply it's a messy job once the oil starts, you know, bleeding out all over the place. So it's easy to just take the whole thing off as one set, one piece. And I was hoping to do it easily, and then I could put it into, you know, like an oil container or something like that and bleed the whole thing out without making a mess everywhere. But I was having a bit of trouble trying to get the upper master cylinder down past the lines, as you'll see in a minute. It was a little bit difficult to get off just because I had to get it past these, past the throttle cables. You know, it didn't really want to go past there. I mean, it would have been better to probably take that off first and slide it past, but I did get it past there in the end. And I could tell that the left-hand caliper really was quite bound up. You could really feel it was on the disc quite tight, obviously not releasing properly at all. So definitely we're going to have to strip those down, clean them up, and figure out what's going on there. It's probably rust on the pot. It's probably just not going back and retracting the way it should. But we'll see when we get to that next thing. Now I'm just going to start dismantling the front and getting this all apart. Okay, so I've encountered the first of the hurdles here. I have on the very tops of these, there's like a little hex nut to take these forks apart. I'm going to need to be able to take that out. I don't have the hex. I don't have the hex key to get this out. I don't have one big enough, so I'm going to go and get one of those now, and we'll come back and we'll continue on. Hopefully that will be the only thing that I encounter that I need. I think it probably is. It's always a bit confusing for me because I've got a whole bunch of tools here and I've got a whole bunch of tools in New Zealand, and I can never remember what I have here and what I have in New Zealand. And sometimes I'll go to do a job and I think, oh, I've got the tools to do that job, but no, I haven't got the tools here. I've actually got the tools somewhere else, so it does create a slight problem for me. So these are the nuts here. Well, these are basically got to get an Allen key socket into there, or Allen key into that socket, I should say, so that we can get this all apart. Otherwise we're never going to be able to get this apart. So that's the first thing to do. Everything else is going to be straightforward. All the other things I can get those undone easily enough, I reckon. Okay, so now you can see why it's so good to have this type of front stand. Holds the bike up while I've pretty much got everything off. It turns out that the hex key that I needed for the top of this to get these forks undone, and it's a good idea to undo it before you obviously start loosening everything off, or you'll never get the thing undone. It's really tight. It was a 17 millimeter. You need to be careful when you're undoing it. You need to use a pretty big bar. It's usually pretty tight, and it would be very easy to come around and whack your tank or your screen, depending on which one you're doing. So take care with it. Use a long bar. You need a long bar to get it undone. And just, as I say, be careful of the screen, be careful of your tank and your front fairing. It's easy to damage it. I jammed my finger between my tank and my bar. Even though I was being careful, I still managed to do that, which wasn't much fun. And the other thing I've done is I've gone around and I've loosened everything off before I actually started taking these forks out, because if you loosen all the nuts off, you know, the axle nuts and everything else, well, everything's, while the main bolts are tight on the actual forks, then the whole job becomes a whole lot easier. If you try and do that later and loosen things up, once everything starts to become loose, it becomes a real problem and you'll struggle to get it apart. I'll show you a couple of little things here, little tricks as well that you've got to look for. So these are the sockets on the end that, or the nuts on the end that require the hex key, the 17 millimeter hex key. And loosen those off before you undo things, as I said before. Now the other thing is that there's a little, like a little lip that sits on here, and these have like these little circlips that sit over the forks. And just be careful you don't lose these. It's easy to not know these are here and bounce them off, and if you, you know, you can lose them on your garage floor pretty easily and not find them again. So just be aware of those, and you've got to remember to put them on these. They're not critical, but they just, you know, help when you're sort of setting everything up. It helps you give it an approximation of where everything's supposed to go much more nicely. Now the other thing, I've sort of been over these forks and just had a little bit of a look at them. So these have got a little bit of pitting in them. I don't know if you can see the pitting there. Maybe you can. It's a little bit hard to show, but they have a little bit of pitting. This is not ideal. I can feel it with my nail a little bit. I can feel it as I run over that. That's definitely through the chrome, which is a bit of a shame. And you know, the ideal in this situation really, when it's like this, really is to have the forks re-chromed or replace the stanchions, because you know, if this fork bottoms out and the seal comes up over this point, what can happen is that can slowly ruin the seal, or quickly ruin the seal. It can sort of rip part of it basically, and then they don't perform their job anymore, which is a real shame. So these forks are okay, but they're not in great condition because of that. This one's not quite so bad. It's got a few spots there as well on that side. Luckily there's nothing lower down where it really would be critical, where it's running over it all the time. So down these areas here, I mean, this is going to be pretty important. There's nothing down there. So we're going to take a chance. We'll hope this will be okay. I think it probably will be, because they haven't leaked so far. But the thing is, you know, this is a warning. Keep your forks clean when they're on your bike. You've really got to go over your forks and just be checking them, wiping them down, not letting moisture accumulate on them, especially if you're storing your bike outside, because once you get rust here, it really is expensive to sort this out. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to undo these caps, take these caps out. We're going to pry the seals off here. We will be, there's a Allen key in here. You can see it in there, that's got to get undone, and we'll have to drain these out, see what sort of condition the oil's in, and we'll start stripping these down and seeing where we're at with them. Now the other thing is the wheel and the wheel bearings, the seals in here. So it's a good idea when you've you know, got this all apart is to check all the bearings, grease all the stuff up, check the state of these seals, make sure the dust seals are okay. Once these dust seals have had it, once the moisture can get into the bearings don't last very long at all. So you really want to keep this stuff in good nick, tidy it up each time you can. This one's not looking too bad neither. And the other thing is that this this shaft that goes through the center of here, this is like a tapered fit, and it's different sizes, and the spaces also have to remain in the right places. So it's always a good idea to put your bolt back through the center of here, just temporarily loosen it, temporarily tighten it up, so that the spaces, you know which side the space is going if you haven't got your manual and stuff, which I don't have for this bike. So if you start pulling it apart, then you'll you know, it'll just take you longer to sort it out when you put it all back together again. The other thing that we have here is the master cylinder rebuild kit, and this is one of the reasons I was saying it's good to rebuild these, because you can see this is actually in a real state. Now you couldn't tell when this was on the bike, but you can tell now that you've got it off. You can see that that dust seal's absolutely had it, and so if the dust seal's had it, that means that dirt's got in there basically, and the seal inside there won't be far behind being ruined as well. So, and this is, you know, your main braking system, so it's always a good idea to pull this off and rebuild this. It's not overly expensive to do, and it's a pretty easy task, especially when you take it all off in one piece like I have here, so you're not getting oil and a mess everywhere. Yeah, so as you can see there, you know, that really needed replacing, even though when it was on the bike it didn't look like it needed replacing. It looked like, and it felt like it was okay. So you know, who knows how much longer that might have gone. It might have gone for another year or so, but eventually it would have definitely packed the sad. So it's good to be doing this, and certainly good to be replacing these lines. I mean, these lines are really old. One thing I am amazed about with this MC22 is, you know, dual lines, and a lot of bikes don't have this. They have a single line coming down and then one going across the top of the mudguard, and it's not as efficient. This is a far more efficient system. This is like a proper racing system, and really these bikes, when they came out, they were pretty flash, you know, had a lot of really good features, and this is one of them. You know, it's just dual lines to the calipers, which is awesome to see on a, you know, on a 20-plus-year-old bike. You're going to need lots of brake clean for this job. One other thing that you need, I'll take you over here. So one other thing you need for this job, aside from that 17mm socket to undo the tops of the forks, is you need a 30mm socket to undo your stem here as well. Well, that is if you were going to take this off. In fact, you could actually drop it off without doing that, but it's always nice to get this off and have a look and grease all the stuff underneath here as well. So if you do need to take this off, like I'm going to, then 30mm socket to undo this. Everything else is all pretty much standard sizes, you know, 12mm, 14mm, 8mm for some of the things, and 10mm, and everything else, you know, just straightforward really. Nothing complicated about the job aside from that. Okay, so it probably took me about sort of, you know, 25 minutes to get that front of that bike apart, maybe half an hour. If I'd had the tools on hand, I wouldn't have needed to waste another hour going around looking for the parts that I need. It's interesting going down the hardware shops these days. Is the tool shop that I go to down here, Super Cheap, a lot of their shelves are just looking quite empty, and they must be struggling to import things, I guess, the same as I was when I was running my business. But you can see it right across the board, and you see it at Kmart and other shops that you go to. So I ended up having to go down Total Tools to get the tools that I needed, and I found that it's actually cheaper generally to buy a whole set. I'll show you what I got. So I got a TTI 8-piece set, and this had everything from 5mm right up to 17mm, and the 17mm was the size that I needed. So that's quite handy. Now the thing is, you could buy the sockets individually, but one individual socket and the short throw socket, and these are the longer throw one. The short throw socket was about almost $15 for one socket. I mean, obviously you get a trade discount, but still, you know, $15, $14 for a socket is quite a bit. I got the whole set. The whole set was about $55, and you get everything, and they're all long throw as well. So that's quite handy, because when you come to undo some of these forks and things, you sometimes need a long throw socket to get into the end of these. I've got a feeling that this 5mm might even be the size that we need. No. And there you go. That was the other reason why I bought these longer hex sockets. I mean, you could use a set of Allen keys in here as well to undo this, but I've used Allen keys in the past, and it's quite difficult to do this job with a set of Allen keys. It's far better to have the proper tool and be able to get something decent on the end of this, and get a bit of force on it to actually undo these. Otherwise, you can, if it doesn't fit really nicely, or if you slip a little bit, you can mess these Allen key heads up, and once you mess those heads up, getting these out will be a nightmare. So it's far better to buy something like this. So I thought, well, I'll get the whole set, then it'll probably have the other size that I need, and sure enough it does. So so that's pretty useful. It's great. By the way, I used just a little bit of WD-40 for cleaning those, cleaning these stanchions, and a little bit of green pad. You can get different grades of the Scotch-Brite type pad as well, so you don't want a really harsh scratchy one. You want kind of like a mid-range or a lighter range one, just enough so that it, you know, so you're not pushing real hard, but you just want to be pulling kind of the surface of any dirt off the stanchions. And the other interesting thing is, you see, is if you've got a little bit of a pitting on this, with this pad, you can feel that pitting. I can feel it grabbing the pad a little bit up there. I mean, this is where it doesn't matter, because it's where obviously the clamps go onto it, but it's a good indicator, because if it's pulling this pad, chances are it's probably going to damage the seal, and you probably need to get them fixed. Luckily, the ones that are a little bit lower down, the pitting down here, you don't really feel it. There was one on one of the other ones, but it was quite high up, so that's why I'm not so concerned about it. But yeah, the ideal would be to obviously to redo them. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm going to get on with this job now. We'll start getting these apart, get the oil out of them, see what the oil looks like, and we'll come back to you guys again. So yesterday we ended up running out of light and time, just because I've got other things I have to do in the day aside from getting on and doing this job, which was a little bit frustrating. Chasing around, getting the extra tools that I needed in the morning, and then I got stuck. I got stuck with the bolts that the little Allen key nuts that go in the end of here. I just could not get them undone. You know, as I say, I've got that long Torx socket. Or Allen key socket, and I just could not get those bolts out. They were just in there so tight. Often they have Loctite on them, or they've just been in there for a long time. I think in this case they'd been in there for a long time. Just have a look now and see if they've got Loctite. No. So no, it doesn't look like they've had Loctite on them, but they'd certainly been in there a long time, and they'd been really tightened up, like probably over tightened in fact. And I had a breaker bar on it. I'll show you the breaker bar. So I started off with an ordinary wrench. I couldn't get it undone with that. Then I had this breaker bar on it, which is only a short breaker bar, but I was, you know, I mean, they're only small bolts, and I was concerned that if I put too much force on them, they'd break off inside there, or they'd round off, which they can do, which is very frustrating. So I tried heating them. I put a bit of heat on them just to see if that would loosen it, but I've only got a small torch here. It wasn't quite big enough. I couldn't get quite enough heat in them. And that didn't work. I had an impact driver which I was using, and I still couldn't get them undone. I just put a lot of force on them. And the problem is, you see, when you're doing these forks too, is you've got to have a really good way to hold these. I don't have a bench set up in this garage because it's not my garage, so you know, that makes a bit of a problem. Normally what I would do is I would normally have a bench set up with a nice vise where I could put these in a vise and I could get a little bit more force on it. So I was trying to hold it and try and undo it, and I just gave up in the end. I probably spent about an hour or so trying to get them undone, and just couldn't do it without the risk of breaking them. So in the end I shot up to Brisbane Motorcycles in Caboolture up the road up here, and they did it for me, and they did it all really quickly. They pretty much did it on the spot. I walked in, had a chat with the guy about motorbikes, and while I was doing that, they undid them, and they did the whole lot for free, which was awesome. So big shout out to Caboolture Motorcycles for doing that for me. It was awesome. I would say if you're doing this job ever, and you don't have if you don't have really good long breaker bar or whatever, or you're worried about breaking them, it's always better to err on the side of caution, because if you break these off inside here, and I've seen them broken off before, it's a nightmare. You will have a big nightmare of a job trying to get it apart once that happens. So it's far better to, in this sort of situation, I reckon, just call it a day, take it to a shop, go somewhere where they've done it a million times and let them do it. It turned out they actually got it off with a breaker bar, and I've actually got a bigger breaker bar here, and I could have used this. But as I say, I was just worried that if I put too much force on them, they could break, and they do. Sometimes the heads just shear off them and you end up with the bolt left inside there, which is really annoying. And especially with forks, you know, so you don't want that messed up, you don't want it damaged. So that's pretty much the end of the day. By the time I got back here, we had a rainy day yesterday. It's looking a little bit overcast again today, and the light was terrible, so I just gave up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get on with breaking these down. We'll get the dust, we'll get the seals out of them. There's like a little steel, it's kind of like these rings actually, but the opposite of this, and it springs back inside here that holds the actual seals down. We'll get that out, we'll get those seals out, we'll take them apart, we'll clean them up, and we'll go from there. So that's what I'm going to get into now. Oh, now that's the other thing that I thought that I should probably show you guys, is the oil that came out of these forks. So this is the oil, that's the colour of it, as you can see there. It's pretty horrendous stuff, and that's the state that it gets in if you leave it there for too long, basically. And this stuff absolutely stinks. You've got no idea how bad this smells. It smells really, really, really bad. So typically what's going to happen with that fork oil over time is that is going to absorb a whole heap of moisture. It does a lot of work. Surprising how much work the fork oil does. And it becomes useless. It can't actually damp the forks anymore. So really what you want to do is you want to be changing your fork oil regularly. Like Dave Moss on Dave Moss Tuning will say that you should be doing your fork oil, I think it's about every 5 to 6,000 Ks. So it's kind of like doing an oil change on your engine. And if you don't do it, then what happens is as time goes by, you slowly just lose the damping effect of the oil, and it just doesn't do its job properly anymore. Okay, so I'll try and show you the ring down the inside here now. So you see that ring inside there? You can just see it in there, it's like a wavy ring. That's what we need to take out. And it just lifts out like that, so it's pretty straightforward to get out. That ring has actually had moisture on it, and I can see the moisture where it's been on it. And that's simply because this dust seal now is really beyond, like, I mean, that's not even rubberized anymore. That's like a piece of concrete. It has been in there for so long that it's basically become useless, and it's not doing its job anymore. So we just want to drive these seals out, so we can just we can kind of use the forks to get the seal out, and that's lifting up there now. There we go, it's out. And it's as easy as that. And you can see the colour of the fluid down the inside of these. It's just absolutely disgusting. They need a really good clean. So there's a few items to inspect here, and now we've got this apart, we want to keep everything in order. We don't want to mess the order of these forks up. It's good to have a set of gloves as well, because this is just quite a horrible job. This, as I say, this oil is really, really stinky. It's not much. It's not very nice when you get it on your hands. But we need to make sure that all the seals and everything go back in the correct order. So what we're going to do is we're going to start taking things off kind of in the order that they would go on and laying them out. So we'd have that. I mean, those two things are fairly obvious. This has to go on, the seal has to go on in a particular order. So that's the bottom part of the seal. That's the bottom part of the seal there. The top of the seal is the upper. So put that down like that. Let's clean this ring up. And again, I can see where the moisture's got onto this just a little bit. It's just got a little bit of, you know, very, very minor surface rust on the top side of that. Oh, and on the bottom as well. Yeah, so it's happened. So moisture's definitely been in here. And if there's moisture in here, that means there's moisture in the oil, which is not so great. And these Teflon rings, these also, it's good to replace these once in a while when they get worn. These ones are actually in pretty good shape. They're not too bad. The inside of the Teflon is looking pretty good. The outside's got a little bit of wear and discoloration on it, but otherwise it's good. We want all traces of the old oil basically out of the inside of these. We don't want it in there at all anymore, so we really want to clean this up quite nicely. Okay, so I've got a vise behind me with a little bit of cork in the jaws, and I just use that to hold the stanchion as I was trying to get the cap undone. It's probably about the easiest way to do it. Wash that goes on the end of the spring. The spring itself. So I'm just using a little bit of brake and parts cleaner because it doesn't leave residue, and I just wanted to sort of get the last of the old oil and stuff off these parts, make sure they're really clean before we start putting this back together. Okay, so we had a slight hiccup in the plan because I had the wrong weight oil. So what I should have been using is a 10 weight oil, and for some reason last time we were checking for oil for my 1000 and my 250, someone came up with this idea of using 5 weight oil. I don't know how that happened, but it happened. So yeah, anyway, yeah, the guys down at AMX, they sorted me out because I buy stuff off them all the time, and they swapped it over to the correct stuff, which is good. So now we've got a 10 weight oil. I think it's about 382 mils or 385 mils in each fork, and we're almost at the stage of doing that now. Now, one of the things that's quite nice to do when you do this job is to put a rubber, put a bit of a plastic bag or something over the top of the fork, because this has this little these little nicks in the fork here where that ring sits in, and also the tops of the edges, even though they're kind of chamfered over, they can catch your seals as you put new seals on. And what you don't want is you don't want your new seals damaged. You don't want to be putting the seals on and then having to do it twice. Make sure you put them on the right way up, not upside down. One other thing we need to do is to put a little bit of lubrication on the seals. Now these seals feel really nice and flexy, like on the inside here, they're really super nice and flexy. You can sort of see it there. And these old ones really, they're just, yeah, well actually that one's okay, but yeah, they're just not the best, not in the best shape. So it's good to replace them. It's always good to do it. So we're going to use a little bit of oil just to lubricate the inside of the seal. Yeah, and these are much tighter than the old seal. If I put the old seal on here, I can press it on pretty easily. These are just that little bit tighter. And probably if I hadn't used the bag, probably it would be easy to nick the edges of them, which would not be cool. Still a long way to go. The problem we're having inside here is that we've got this ring, that Teflon ring, that needs to be banged down as well. And so it's being a bit stubborn. Doesn't really want to get down there nicely. Yeah, I'm not really happy with the progress that we're having here, getting this on. And again, it is to do with that ring. So I think what we'll do is we'll bring this out again. And I'll try putting that ring on first. So I've finally got the fork back together. It was a little bit of a hassle to get the fork together. I'll show you why in a minute. It was to do with the screw that goes in the end here that screws into the end of the fork leg. That was kind of the piece that was inside there was kind of moving around, and I'll show you what I mean. The only other hassle was just getting the dust seals real easy, getting the main seal in here and actually getting in the space that's underneath there, and I'll show you those things now. I thought I'd show you the layout of the whole thing so that, you know, if you're doing this job, you know exactly where everything goes rather than having to look into a manual, which can be frustrating. So we have the fork leg, and then at the bottom of the fork leg, we would have the screw. The screw screws in through the end of there. So you have the screw that screws in the end, this cap, a little spring, and that's all on the bottom. And that's going to be screwed up through the bottom of the fork. Now the problem is that of course what happens is if you don't screw this in pretty early in the piece, which I didn't, this can kind of float around and move around, and then you've got to try and get this all back in while the seal's in there, which is a pain in the neck. So this time I'm going to try and put the screw in a little bit earlier in the piece so that I don't have that problem. Then you have your spring, you have your washer, like a spacer, and on top of that would be the screw. That all goes down the center of the stanchion. And then inside the top of the stanchion we have this seal, and this is the seal. This is the seal that I was having the problem with. This one has to sit down inside here. There's like a seat inside here. Kind of see that seat, and this has to sit right down inside there. And if it doesn't, then you can't get the seal in. And I was having trouble getting this in. This can be quite a pain in the neck to get in. And that has a spacer sitting on top of it, so you can hammer down on it, but you've just got to be careful you don't damage anything when you're doing it. Then we have our fork seal, oil seal, a clip, and the dust seal, and that's pretty much it. So you've just got to make sure you oil everything up quite nicely before you start putting it together. Make sure you've got lots of oil down on the inside of here, so that you can try and get these, you know, so you get a little bit of lubrication when you're trying to hammer these things in. You don't want too much oil, but you want just enough so that it's not trying to go in there dry, which doesn't really help the situation at all. Yeah, and to add to the complication, of course, is that this is sitting over the top of the tube, like so, like that, and you've got to try and hammer it down while it's inside there with the spacer over the top of it, and it's not the easiest of jobs. So yeah, you've just basically got to keep tapping around, tap it down, tap it down, tap it down. While you're tapping it down, you've got to try not to damage the fork leg. So anyway, that's where that's at. I'm going to put this one together now, then we'll start getting the fork oil back into them, and we'll go from there. Okay, so I've figured out the kind of easiest way to do this, and the easiest way to do this actually was to layer the fork up, you put everything inside it. You got the spring and the spacer in here, and then everything's pushed up to the top, and then what you could do, just fit the tube over the end and then start screwing your screw into the end here, and that worked pretty nicely. I didn't have any hassles. It all lined up pretty good when I did it that way. It saved me a lot of time. So now I've just got to get this ring on here. So that's the next job. So that's like a Teflon ring. It needs to sit down inside there. So we'll get some oil in here. We'll put the spacer on after that. And we'll start tapping it down around the outside and see where we get to. Okay, so this is probably not the ideal. I've used the seal driver to bang this down a little bit, and I've got it down. It actually went down quite easily this time. And then I've got this metal punch. Now you've got to be careful, obviously, because you don't want it to be gouging into the side of this chrome. Otherwise, you can have a problem. But you can hold it off to one side, and you can just tap it down lightly. And that's all I'm doing. You've got to kind of try and get around the thing a little bit at a time. Yeah, see, I can feel that going down. It's going down really well now. It's not sticking at all this time, which is great. And in fact, I think that's pretty much it. I think it's already done. Just if you don't get that, slide basically in there properly, you're going to have problems getting your seal on here. Get the seal on is going to be a big hassle. So I think we're ready now. We can put the seal on next. And that's it, it's done. So that fork's done as well now. So we should be able to top these up with oil now. Get the correct amount of oil in each leg. We'll put them all back together. We can put them back on the bike, which is great. We're pretty much at the end of this job now. So I've just topped the forks up with oil. It's 383 cc's or 83 millimeters from the top of the fork when the fork hasn't got the extra things in it, like the springs, the spacer, or the washer. So what I've done, and the easiest way to do it, I reckon, is just use an old bottle like this. It's got mils marked on the side. An old baby bottle's perfect. You can get close. You know, you get your 300 odd mils in there. You pour it into your stanchion. Your stanchion's got to be, it can't be at the highest point. It's got to be pushed down to the lowest point. And then I've got my caliper here, which I've got set up to 83 millimeters from the end of there. And what I'm able to do is I could just pop that down into the top of there, and I can just see now that the end of the caliper is just touching the surface of the oil when I've got it at the correct level. And that's probably one of the easiest ways, I reckon, to do it. I reckon, you know, I mean, it's as good as any other way. Then what we can do when we're finished doing that is we can put the springs and the bits and pieces back at the top of it, screw the cap on, and it's pretty much a done job. So as you can see there now, when I bring that stanchion up, that's pretty much where it sits. And now to get the cap on there is quite easy. And I was having some issues earlier because that spacer inside there wasn't sitting down properly. So when I went to screw the cap on, I just could not get it to screw down properly. So you need to check that. If you're in a spacer that's poking up a little bit, that means that you've basically messed the job up and you need to start again. Not start again from scratch, but you certainly need to sort the thing out. Now, you want to check for leaks as well, of course, when you've done this, just in case you have damaged one of your seals when you're doing that, because it's a bit of a pain in the ass if you've put this all back on the bike and then you've got a problem. So what you want to do now is you just want to pump this a few times and try and just make sure that there are no leaks and stuff. So now it's going to be a little bit hard to tell at first because obviously you have a little bit of oil still sitting around these seals, but there should be no major oil spillage. And that's feeling and it's feeling a looking pretty good now, so I'm pretty happy with that. And now we've just got to start reassembling this. So front wheel, I want to grease up the bearings and stuff. We'll get it back on, we'll put it back on the front of the bike, and we'll see how it feels once it's on there. I think it's going to be pretty good. Okay, so I've just quickly put the front back on this bike. I'm pretty happy with it now. I haven't tightened the bolts down or anything yet because we need to sort of settle the forks in and all that kind of stuff. And also I've got to do the brakes still, so that'll be the next job to do. So it's always a little bit hard to tell, you know, until you get the brakes on and everything else. But it feels good so far. I mean, I can bob it up and down, and it's not got, like it hasn't got any extra bounce that it shouldn't have or anything like that. It's pretty much when I jump on it, it heads down, and then it just comes up, and it doesn't have an extra rebound or anything like that. I mean, the thing with the forks on this bike is that the forks on these bikes are just not adjustable at all, so you don't have any type of adjustment. So what you see is what you get. The only way you could ever adjust these forks would be to put measure the sag weight for your body with your gear on, work out whether the spring rate is correct, and change the springs. And what some people do with these bikes is they upgrade the forks to different models. I don't really want to do that because, as I've said before, I just want to try and keep these bikes pretty original. So I'm not gonna, I don't think I'm gonna change anything. If I changed anything, it would only be the spring rate, and that would be it. I wouldn't put upside down forks on it or anything like that. At least I don't think I would at the moment anyway. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. It's pretty good. I think it was well worth doing. I mean, it's something that should have been done anyway, so it's good to do it. And I need to do my 1000 as well because it hasn't been done. I mean, I don't know. It's probably never had its fork oil changed, or maybe once in its life or something like that. So it's probably terrible. But one of the keys with this fork oil is that if the fork oil is stinky, it's too old. If it's black, it's too old. If it's been in there for probably more than 6,000 or 7,000 Ks, it's too old. You need to change it. So, you know, I mean, bikes are not like cars where you just, you know, do 1,000,000 kilometers and people don't even think about changing the oil. You know, bike, if you're going to be onto it with your bike, you really need to be doing the maintenance and keeping it up to date. You need to be doing the oils, you need to be doing your engine oil, your filters, and you certainly need to be doing your fork oil if you want to keep it at its best. It's important. So yeah, that's about all I can think of today anyway. Tomorrow's another day. We'll get into getting the brakes back on this bike tomorrow, and they should start to feel pretty good after that as well. So that's tomorrow's job. And we'll probably make a video on that as well, I guess. But anyway, this bike's been sitting around for a while waiting for this job to be done, and I'm just happy that it's done. You know, I can't wait to chuck some new tyres on this bike. I think I'm going to put Rosso 3s on it. I think I've got Rosso 3s in my 400. I think they're good enough for this kind of bike, and I'm going to, you know, then I should be able to rego the bike and get it out and have a bit of a ride on it, and have a think about what else I want to do, whether I want to do the engine work or not. I'm not sure at this stage whether I want to do too much more. It starts getting pricey, you know, and to do pistons and rings and things like that it's fairly expensive, and it's a big job. You know, it's pretty much an engine out job with this bike, so I have to have a think about it. And the thing at the moment is that the bike, when I do ride it, it feels reasonably nice. You know, like it's not super powerful, but you know, then 250s aren't. But it's fun to ride. You know, it's a really fun bike. I'd highly recommend it if you can get one. You pick these up pretty cheap now. If you can get one and you got the money to muck around with a little bit, it's worth having a small bike, have a bit of a laugh on, you know. Anyway, that's about all I've got to do for today. I'll talk to you guys again soon.